The guy that I talked to was like, you absolutely have to be 40 the day that you get the vaccine.
Unclear messaging to pharmacies across BC's, meaning some people turning 40 this year are being turned away when they shouldn't be.
Well, I've lost hope for the NPA after having been involved in the organization for 16 years.
A political rift with Vancouver's NPA has now widened, with 3 councillors quitting the party and sitting as independents here at City Hall. How the 3 women say they were blindsided with the way the party selected its mayoral candidate for next year's civic election.
Some Metro Vancouver mayors are pushing for more answers when it comes to the future of this aging and often congested tunnel.
You know, they've got a lot on their plate. I understand that. But this is a high priority.
Just ahead, what the new BC budget has in store for this major roadway.
There are 862 new cases of COVID-19 in BC tonight, and 7 more people have died in the last day. 483 people are currently in hospital, 164 in intensive care. Anyone 30 and older is now eligible to register for their vaccine on the government's website, and anyone born in 1981 and earlier can get the AstraZeneca shot at their local pharmacy. A huge development when it comes to the incoming travel restrictions expected to be put in place in BC by the end of this week. Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth says Vancouver Coastal and Fraser Health will be considered one region when it comes to check stops.
Vancouver Coastal and Fraser Health Authority will be treated as one health authority. So you're likely to see something at the ferries, for example, or at the other obvious location is when you head into the interior, just before Hope, if you were going to take the number 1 or the Hope Princeton or the Coquihalla. But you will not be seeing anything in the Boundary Road or in Vancouver or in Burnaby or the Tri-Cities, for example.
Several local police departments have taken to social media to say they are not doing random checks for compliance with travel restrictions. The details of those, by the way, will be revealed on Friday.
The Prime Minister failed at the border last year. Why is he failing again?
Pressure mounting on Canada to tighten up air travel as the country sees its first case of a COVID variant first spotted in India.
Importation from the border is a fraction of the cases we're coming in, but we will still make sure we are doing everything necessary to keep Canadians safe.
COVID-19 vaccinations so close yet so far away for some.
The guy that I talked to was like, you absolutely have to be 40 the day that you get the vaccine. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. And I said, well, I think Heart's going to let me do it. And they were like, well, we prefer not to break the law.
This is what many people turning 40 this year, but not 40 yet, are finding. They're being turned away from pharmacies giving AstraZeneca shots, some with appointments already booked because they haven't turned 40 yet. The BC government website is updated, showing the eligibility cutoff is a 1981 birth year, but that message not getting to all pharmacies.
I was even denied going through the booking process, and I did actually get a message saying that you're not currently 40, so you can't go through and you can't register for a shot.
It's the same issue many people turning 55 ran into just a few weeks ago.
Tried 3 places, was turned away, and finally managed to get one at a pharmacy where I just knew the pharmacist from being a regular customer. She said, no problem, I'm going to give it to you.
The province says the message is clear.
I think the program's going well, and I urge people to be patient. But I think the pharmacies that have delivered this program on very short notice have done an excellent job. And if there are problems, I'll be happy to look into them.
This was a few weeks ago, so I can't believe that now that they're lowering it, that there's a barrier to entry. It should just be, let's get shots in arms, people.
For those relying on pharmacy shots, this supply is running low.
We have one program in pharmacies. The vaccines are out there. And when they're done, we won't have more until we get more AstraZeneca. There's a second program, which is the second AstraZeneca program that's focused on the 13 communities I've described, and we are contacting people and making a very significant number of appointments.
Canada's working on getting more AstraZeneca from the U.S. stockpile, the American president indicating that is a possibility. But for those with appointments this round, but not quite 40 years old yet, they're hoping everything goes smoothly here on in.
I haven't gone yet. So I'm hoping that when I show up and they see my ID, they will actually give me the vaccine.
For City News in Victoria, I'm News 1130's Lisa Yusta.
More AstraZeneca doses could be coming from the U.S. as Canada's shipments of the vaccine have been impacted by export controls from India. U.S. President Joe Biden told reporters that he talked to the Prime Minister for a half hour and implied the U.S. could loan more COVID-19 vaccines in the coming weeks and months ahead, while Canada is in the midst of navigating through multiple delays from AstraZeneca and Moderna. The U.S. has given Canada roughly 1.5 million doses of AstraZeneca and about 1 million more to Mexico. As of Tuesday, 40% of America's population has had one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. In comparison, Canada has treated 25% of its population with a dose.
It's really sad to see colleagues in that sort of distress.
An Abbotsford nurse's emotional post about the pandemic after losing another COVID-19 patient has gone viral. But the Canadian Nurses Association says she's not alone.
It does feel very much like an old boys club.
3 members of Vancouver's NPA, or Nonpartisan Association, have walked away from the party and will now sit as independents here at Vancouver City Council. The 3 women say the party's selection for its mayoral candidate in the upcoming civic election was a backroom deal.
We spoke to the board. The 3 of us spoke to the president and to John Cooper, and when we quizzed them on why they did this, the answer was, according to the bylaws, they could. They did it because they could, and that's not good enough.
Colleen Hardwick, Lisa Dominato, and Sarah Kirby-Young are frustrated with the party's process that saw Park Board Commissioner John Cooper be selected as the party's mayoral candidate for a civic election that is still 18 months away.
Well, in the past, when the NPA has chosen to do appointments, it's been a very robust process. Usually there's an application form that's quite comprehensive, a criminal record check, a written statement as to bring forward your qualifications to why you think you would be a good candidate, provision of references, work to sign up members, an interview, and an open process for people to, as I said, indicate their interest and participate if they want to do that. None of that happened here.
Certainly, it seems a bit cumulative. As you recall, we lost a caucus member. Councillor Bly resigned well over a year ago, and then subsequently we've been responding to various concerns in the media around the position of the NPA board on various issues, and we've been very clear that we support an inclusive and diverse city. However, it's taken away and distracted from the work that we need to be doing.
I wish they had given me a little more time. We spoke the other day, and I thought we had a good discussion.
John Cooper was appointed as the NPA's mayoral candidate earlier this month and spoke about the 3 councillors and their decision Wednesday afternoon.
Well, I was upset the last time when I didn't get the nomination, and I stayed within the party and worked for the election of our team. And, to me, we need to stick together. It's a long game. I think we need to focus on defeating Kennedy Stewart in 2022, and that's what I plan to do. We'll attract a diverse group of candidates and look forward to the residents of Vancouver making their choice at the next civic election.
Melissa DiGenova is the sole NPA member left on council. She released a statement saying, "The reality is little will change for me. As a caucus, sometimes we would vote together, sometimes not. I expect that to continue." George Affleck served 2 terms on city council with the NPA and says in the end, voters will decide if the party made the right call.
The NPA's decision process is the NPA's decision process. The election is when you get to be chosen democratically. So if the NPA would, for whatever reason, and I'm not saying I support it or whatever, it doesn't matter, that's their process. And they have to go to the electorate with that process in mind.
The next civic election, by the way, is still a year and a half away. In Vancouver, David Zura, City News.
Police are investigating the Lower Mainland's latest homicide. A man was shot near the Langley Sportsplex just after 9 o'clock this morning. Police are revealing very little about the victim, but say he was in his 40s. Investigators believe this was a targeted attack and linked to gangs. Sergeant Frank Jang with the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team says this latest incident of violence is infuriating and pledges police will do everything they can to get to the bottom of it.
It was bright as it is bright right now. There were a number of people here, families. The Sportplex I don't have to remind the residents of the North Langley community where we are right now. It's a skating rink. There's a children's playground inside. There were a number of young people, parents, going about their daily business when this happened. We need you to please come forward with what you saw and heard this morning.
This is the second shooting in broad daylight this week. A 20-year-old man was shot on the basketball court at Coquitlam's Town Center Park on Monday evening. No arrests have been made in either case. Call police if you have any information. Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou's request to delay the final leg in her extradition hearings has been granted, just days before they were set to begin. The hearings were scheduled to begin Monday, but Meng's lawyers say they need until August to review documents and allow time for the third wave of COVID-19 to subside. Lawyers for Canada's Attorney General had argued there's no justification to delay proceedings in the high-profile case, especially given the public interest. Meng was arrested at Vancouver's airport in 2018 at the request of the U.S. to face fraud charges related to America's sanctions against Iran, which both she and Huawei deny. A teleconference has been scheduled with both legal teams for April 28th to determine a new date.
It can be a symbol of what can be achieved when community works together.
After weeks of protests, a beloved cedar tree in North Vancouver, believed to be more than 200 years old, is being saved. Just ahead, the efforts to preserve the tree and what it means to the neighborhood.
It's time. It's time that we moved on. This is a critical piece of infrastructure.
The George Massey Tunnel between Delta and Richmond is heavily used and seismically sensitive. There have been calls to replace this aging crossing for years, and one Metro Vancouver mayor is frustrated at what little the new BC budget offers for this major roadway.
I'm very disappointed that here's another provincial budget where the George Massey Tunnel full project is not, there's no business plan, no line items, expenditures per year.
The new BC budget puts forward $7.6 billion in transportation investments over the next 3 years. Part of that money is supposed to go to the Massey Tunnel replacement project, but Minister of Finance Lena Robinson couldn't say exactly how much.
And as soon as we have a decision about the crossing, the funding has been set aside. We'll be able to know exactly what it's going to cost, and we'll have specific details once the decision is made. And I'm hoping that'll happen soon. The business case was submitted this fall. The work is moving as quickly as we can.
Minister Robinson wouldn't say when that business case would be finished. Commuters and industrial transports have waited a long time for this tunnel replacement. It was built in the 1950s, but as the region's population and traffic has grown in the decades since, the tunnel's 4 lanes have not. In 2012, the BC Liberals under Christy Clark promised to replace it with a bridge, but 5 years later, those plans were scrapped when the new NDP government said it needed more research and consultation, which brings us to today.
What's the danger of delays, ultimately?
Ultimately, it's already very well known that the seismic capabilities of this infrastructure, the tunnel, is not sufficient. If we had a minor earthquake, we could lose that crossing.
We really need the governing group to come to decision on the situation and really move the project forward. That's what it takes. You know, they've got a lot on their plate, and I understand that, but this is a high priority.
The finance minister won't offer a timeline for this project until the business case review is complete. She maintains that it is a priority, but the project isn't named in the 2021 budget highlights. In Richmond, Keir Junos, City News.
This tree can't speak for herself, so we've had to speak for her.
Last month, this giant cedar tree in North Vancouver, believed to be over 200 years old, was set to be chopped down to make room for redevelopment.
For some people, this tree is 26 years of a walk of theirs that they do every morning. For some people, this tree has legitimately saved them from committing suicide. I've had folks tell me that. It's that serious. It's really to that degree.
But weeks of protests and thousands of signatures on a petition to save the big old tree have since paid off. The site developer, Darwin Properties, announced Wednesday that the tree on the corner of 21st Street and Eastern Avenue will be preserved.
We had to completely redesign the building in order to make sure that the tree could stand. We also had to make sure that it was a healthy tree as well. So we were spending several weeks just making sure that the plan that we did present and come forward with was going to keep that tree.
After hearing concerns from the community, Darwin Properties sent an arborist to look over the tree, who determined it's healthy with a wide and shallow root system. The 6-story rental building slated for this area has been completely redesigned to accommodate the tree.
For us, and for me personally, that the tree will now be a feature in our project. And it'll be a reminder of how we can all, work together to create better communities if we take the time to listen to each other.
Trees are what protect the earth. Stop cutting them down.
The City of North Vancouver announced back in December it had signed leases and issued development permits to Darwin Properties and Sunrise Senior Living as part of a plan to redevelop the Harry Jerome neighborhood lands. While preserving this cedar is good news for the protesters, they say the city needs to do more to protect future trees from being chopped.
Time really is of the essence, and every single day we lose another tree. We can't have any more trees. This has to be the last one.
At a City of North Vancouver Council meeting on March 29th, City Council approved an amended motion to explore how the city could implement an interim tree protection bylaw. The motion was put forward by Councillor Don Bell and asks staff to report back on the experiences from other municipalities that have enacted similar bylaws.
The City of North Vancouver is actually only one of 3 municipalities in all of BC that doesn't have some form of tree protection policy on private land.
In the meantime, protesters say preserving this massive cedar is a symbol of what the community is capable of when it works together.
Now the thousands of people that walk past this tree every single day can look at it, and it can be a symbol of what can be achieved when community works together.
In North Vancouver, Miranda Fatour, City News.
The cost of a new e-bike in BC has just come down a little. Victoria has eliminated the provincial sales tax on them as of today. Cycling advocacy groups had been pushing hard to make e-bikes tax exempt. The BC Cycling Coalition says this cuts about $100 to $200 off a typical purchase.
And I just want to reiterate, we're here because we're at a crucial period of time.
BC's Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry and Minister of Health Adrian Dix hold a special COVID information session directly addressing the South Asian community.
A healthcare worker on the front lines of the pandemic in BC says she can't count the number of times she's run to a bathroom or empty room to cry, adding the amount of death she's seen in the last year weighs on her every day. Those heartbreaking revelations come from the nurse at Abbotsford Regional Hospital in an emotional Instagram post made after the death of another patient because of the virus. Kendall Scuda's account of the efforts to try to save the man's life and the toll the pandemic has had on her has gone viral. She says she was on the COVID ward when the man in his 50s with no pre-existing conditions went into cardiac arrest. Despite 35 minutes of CPR, he didn't make it. Adding, when he was pronounced dead, everyone stood there for a minute, silent, exhausted, heartbroken.
It's really sad to see colleagues in that sort of distress. Unfortunately, she's not alone, and we've seen it a fair amount over the last number of months during the pandemic.
Tim Guest is president of the Canadian Nurses Association and says the stresses of the last year are having a toll on nurses who were already stretched before the pandemic.
There's been increased workloads, concerns about availability of resources early on. There was certainly a lot of talk about availability of personal protective equipment. Now it's the burden of wearing it all day and having to change the way we work.
And he says nurses have witnessed a significant amount of human suffering through this crisis.
A lot of loss. And many nurses experienced those things when families weren't able to be present. And they have bridged the space between families and patients and individuals that they've gone through these life altering and sometimes events where they did not survive.
Guest adds before the pandemic, 80% of Canadian nurses surveyed rated their mental health as good or excellent. But a few weeks ago, that dropped to 47%.
We've heard lots of nurses, more and more all the time, talk about when the pandemic ends, They are seriously thinking of retirement for nurses that are at that point in their career, and younger nurses are talking about, well, maybe this isn't the career for me.
Guest says we need to abide by public health orders, echoing the end of Scuta's post, which begs people to stay home, wear a mask, and get vaccinated if eligible. For CityNews in Vancouver, I'm News 1130's Monica Gould.
The Prime Minister is now not even restricting flights from COVID hotspots to stop the entry of new dangerous variants. The Prime Minister failed at the border last year. Why is he failing again?
The Prime Minister under increasing pressure to slow or stop air travel from India as Canada sees its first case of the B1617 COVID variant first spotted in that country. Justin Trudeau says Canada's existing border measures are doing the job, but wouldn't rule out new, stricter rules.
We have some of the strongest measures in the world on the borders, but we will also continue to look at other ways based on science and data to keep Canadians safe. Importation from the border is a fraction of the cases we're coming in, but we will still make sure we are doing everything necessary to keep Canadians safe.
India's current wave is close to overwhelming hospitals and the healthcare system and is on pace to reach 300,000 new cases daily.
It's an emerging situation, not just because of the variant of interest at this point, but because they have a very unfortunately, a very massive resurgence in that country, and we'll be doing that risk assessment again and using the data that we have now collected at the border to inform our next steps.
It's not enough to say you need to have a test result from beforehand because they can be false negatives, they can be fake. It's not enough to say you need to stay in a hotel for maybe 3 days, maybe much less than 3 days, while you have an arrival test process, because people will continue to develop COVID. So they may test negative and still go out and spread.
Dr. Colin Furness specializes in infection control and says a simple travel ban is too easy to avoid. Instead, he says Canada needs to tighten up its quarantine rules.
New Zealand has a good system. You go to a quarantine facility for 14 days and you're tested repeatedly. Even there, once in a while, a case gets out. But because they have almost no COVID, they're actually able to manage that really, really well. So there are examples of countries that have done it really, really well.
Now, details on the first Canadian case of B1617 are still scarce, but reports indicate the person is in Quebec in a region northeast of Montreal. Quebec's public health lab says the person tested positive for COVID 2 weeks ago, but further information like the patient's condition or where and how they were infected are still not available. In Ottawa, Xiaoli Li, City News.
It's not just vaccines, it's vaccines and us against COVID-19.
BC's Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry and Minister of Health Adrian Dix held a special COVID information session Tuesday, directly addressing the South Asian community and media.
South Asian radio and South Asian television have done so much to give people information, important information about public health issues.
Even now, when the messaging comes out, one of the concerns we have is that how many people are still going to understand.
The pair answered questions from South Asian media on the current state of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Fraser Health region, which has a large South Asian community, has continued to be a COVID hotspot in the province. And Moninder Singh with BC's Gurdwaras Council says although the South Asian media has bared the weight of making updated COVID information accessible, he's concerned with the lack of multilingual messaging being provided at the province's live press briefings.
People are watching these updates on Facebook and other channels and TV. Is to have that done immediately in the moment would go so far for people to get updated information. And there's a lot of populations that live and reside within like the Fraser Valley that are already marginalized, either from immigrant or refugee backgrounds, and not having language as a barrier kind of pushes them even to the fringe again.
Questions posed at the information session included topics surrounding school transmission, booking vaccinations, and whether Surrey residents should be more greatly prioritized to get the vaccine, like other hard-hit regions such as Whistler, which has been providing vaccinations to all residents 18 years of age and over.
About 150,000 people have been immunized in Surrey already. The first community, in fact, for a while, the only community whose school staff was vaccinated was Surrey. The first community for childcare workers to be vaccinated, Surrey. the first community for first responders to be vaccinated, above 50,000 in the province. Surrey.
Singh hopes the choice to address the South Asian community will bring people together and not single anyone out.
I agree with the statements as in like we're in this together. I definitely would push that message out to everyone right now as well, that regardless of any individual area in the province or the country, any individual community, that we have to continue to look at this as we're in this together.
In Vancouver, Ashley Burr, City News.